News out of Springfield, where a Hampden County Superior Court jury has just found David Salo guilty of all counts.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Dory Marlin.
And I'm Greg Floyd. Our Kimberly Howard broke this story today. Kimberly is standing by, and I know after an otherwise quiet week of deliberations, this was a rather dramatic end.
Prosecutors say 48-year-old Jay Witt will serve a mandatory 22.5 years in prison for killing William Furlong. Authorities say Witt was a member of the Hells Angels and Furlong
has impaired the ability to get a fair trial. The Berkshire Eagle reports that the attorney for Adam Lee Hall told...
There's more fallout from the arrest of a former Montreal officer accused of feeding information to organized crime.
The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is easily one of the world's most famous motorcycle clubs, and their members, they are often highly revered. While the HYMC it openly describes itself as a club outside of the law for motorcycle enthusiasts. Over the years, they have proven to be the exact opposite. Reports of drug trafficking, kidnappings, extortion, prostitution operations, and even murders are some of the crimes committed by the members. Join me as we witness 5 dangerous people, Hells Angels reacting to life sentences for crimes. What they committed. In just a few hours, we will know the fate of the man who was convicted of a triple murder in Berkshire. The first is the sentence of Kika Ovis, a self-proclaimed Satanist and 34-year-old vampire who was convicted of kidnapping, murdering, and dismembering 3 men in the Pittsfield area, Massachusetts. His sentence was carried out in the High Court of the Hampden County, with Judge Jeffrey Kindler presiding over the case. Gaius Babies was no ordinary person. He had implants in his forehead resembling horns, also had the number 6,366 tattooed over his eyebrows, making sure everyone took in serious his Satanist persona, and could not pass for high nails in his nose, as well as his face and body fully tattooed. Bello Bez, originally from Augusta, Maine, was born Roy Good Finsby Jr., but legally changed his name in 2008 to adapt it to your new person. Caius is the name of a vampire in the Twilight series. While you see he is a Roman god who is believed to be that he had escaped hell, although his appearance extremely strange. Along with his brutal crime, he certainly captured attention, both nationally and internationally. This was not the first time that Belvis came out in the news in 1999. He made headlines when he and his girlfriend of 17 years, Diana Jones, were charged with assault. The duo had lured a 16-year-old girl into their motel room, where Jones cut her back with a razor blade, and then both licked her blood while kissing. The young woman needed 32 points to close the 7-inch wound. Now, this same man, along with his accomplices Adam Lee Hall and David Salud, would appear in court for the murders by David Glasser, Edward Norton, and Robert Shadwell in August of 2011, weeks before Glasser testified in a case against Hall, a member of the Hells Angels. He, along with Chadwick and Frampton, mysteriously disappeared. 10 days later, the dismembered bodies of the 3 friends buried near Pittsfield. The murders were traced to 3 men, and prosecutors alleged that Beautiful Visa had helped kidnap and murdering the 37-year-old Hall and 47-year-old men. Chloe. His trial was moved to Hampden High Court after that his defense lawyers said that the extensive publicity of the case in Berkshire County would prevent a fair jury selection. Despite insisting on his innocence, Bello Vis was declared guilty of kidnapping, murder, and dismemberment of the 3 victims. He was also convicted of 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of witness intimidation in the murders of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. Bello Bien did not take the jury's decision well, and he raged in the courtroom. "I'll see you all in sworn hell. Remember that every damn one of you, I'll see you in hell." Just before his sentencing, Belvis was allowed to address the courtroom and read a prepared statement where he continued to insist on his innocence of the crimes with which he was charged. "My hand was not involved in this, and I will not allow this man sells me my own integrity. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison than face myself in the mirror at the end of the day and make that kind of deal." Judge Jeffrey Kindler sentenced Bellavista to 3 consecutive life sentences each. One without possibility of parole for Glasser murders. Frampton and Chadwell Babis's reaction did not go unnoticed for 3 counts of murder. "I impose a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, each term to be fulfilled one after another. This time I see BS did not show any reaction. Yes, he saw shake your head in intervals with an expression of indifference on his face, as proceedings continued in the courtroom. Adam Lee Hall. To life in prison without possibility of parole. Adam Lee Hall, 37, senior member of the Hells Angels. He was considered the mastermind of the savage murders of 3 men in Pittsfield. Hall, along with Cyrus Babis and David Chow. He had brutally murdered David Glasser, Edward Norton, and Robert Chadwell to prevent Glasser from testifying against him. According to court records, Hall had hit Glaser with a baseball bat sometime in July 2009 because he believed Glasser had stolen from him. Glaser then reported to the police, and Hall was arrested and charged with assault with use of dangerous weapon. 1 year later, while the case was still pending, Hall and July de Doralius attempted to discredit the class as a witness in the case, accusing him of kidnapping. Nicole Brooks, Hall's friend, had reported to police that Glasser had kidnapped her, and as she escaped, he shot her. Another of Hall's friends also placed a gun in Glasser's truck, but the police were able to, realizing his machinations, and this earned him Hall plus charges. However, Hall still had freedom of movement, and it was then when he started dating Chloe and Belvis, who he was a Hells Angels hopeful at the time. On the night of the 27th of August 2011, Shalou, together with her friends Alice and Skywall, were in Babis's apartment when Hall arrived with a bag of dog food. The bag contained a .45 semi-automatic pistol, a Magnum revolver, of the .44 and a sawed-off weapon type AR-15, together with a small revolver. Soon after, Glasser, along with Channel and Frampton, were declared missing. 10 days later, their dismembered bodies were found buried in Beckett. Prosecutors believed the initial plan was to kill Glass, but Hall and his accomplices had found Frampton and Chadwell in the house and decided to kill the 2 men to silence them. At sentencing, Hall initially refused to testify, but at one point he lashed out at the prosecutor when he apparently made an incorrect statement with which he disagreed. The prosecutor there at the house on Sunday afternoon to meet the Hall 20 miles away. At first, his lawyer argued that Hall was being singled out by prosecutors by repeatedly mentioning his membership in the Hells. However, the evidence against him was convincing beyond of all doubt, since Alice in Chains testified that he was with the trio on the afternoon of August 27th of 2011 and that he had seen them with weapons. The evidence in the case is not overwhelming. It is convincing. Clearly convincing, beyond reasonable doubt. The jury stated Adam Lee Hall guilty of 3 counts of murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of witness intimidation, armed robbery, assault and battery with a weapon dangerous, possession of a firearm, and conspiracy. However, he was found not guilty of 2 counts of intimidation of witnesses, extortion and kidnapping, as the jury's verdict was read. Hall seemed devastated by the plethora of charges against him, and he immediately began the sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge sentenced Hall to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of probation, while I read the Hulk sentence, which at first seemed desolate because of the jury's verdict showed no emotion this time. If anything, he seemed less concerned about the sentence. Perhaps he had reconciled himself to his fate. David Salo. We're following breaking news from Springfield, where a jury of Hampton County Superior Court just testified David Salo guilty of all charges, almost 24 hours after jury finds Chalowo guilty of the murder of 3 men from Pittsfield, only for the judge to overturn the verdict because a member of the jury said he did not disagree. The jury has just reached a unanimous verdict, guilty of all charges. David Harley was one of the 3 men involved in the murder and dismemberment of 3 men in Pittsfield. A Hampton County Superior Court jury had just finished convicting him on 9 counts, including 3 counts of murder, intimidation of witnesses, and abduction. Chloe had been one of the men who kidnapped David Glasser to his flatmate, Edward Frampton, and his friend Robert Chadwell, and murdered them. At first, there was no evidence linking Shalou to he had in fact pleaded not guilty to the crime. However, prosecutors at his trial decided to use the testimonies of jail informants as proof that Charlie He was implicated in the crime. One of these informants, identified as Christopher Lee, also stated that while Salo had been in segregation in the House of Berkshire County Correction. In September 2011, they met and discussed the killings. As he had been told, "I have a body. I don't have a body. I only have 1 body. I have 3 bodies. I don't just have 3 bodies, but I made them disappear. I not only made them disappear, but that 14 days later they were found cut into pieces in the bottom of a trench." Another inmate named Jason Lewis also testified against Chloe, saying that they met in October 2011 when they were still in the Berkshire County House of Correction. Lemur stated that Charlie had been more than willing to argue his case and interpreted it as Chloe boasting of which he had done and also intimidated other inmates. He went further to state that he had described the victims as they were tortured beyond torture and cut and made to disappear. Lee also mentioned that Charlie had alluded to being involved with the Aryan Brotherhood and also had an affiliation with the Hells Angels in 2013, just before his trial. Greeted, he was transferred to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, where he met Jethro Kempton, a fellow prisoner and member of the Aryan Brotherhood. Kempton was also one of the informants who testified against Chile at his trial, stating that the defendant had described his role in the kidnapping and murder of the 3 victims, according to Kempton's testimony, that he had knocked on the target victim's door, and when they came in for him, they discovered that that night I had invited 2 friends. Kempton said Chale described the murder jokingly, saying as they were shot, one of the guys ran naked through the woods, said who stripped naked and started shooting at him. He did not say who shot whom or who ran after him, who just said we had to keep track of him for the forest going further. Kempton testified that the defendant, he left the bodies, to rest for a while, so that the blood would clot, so that when they were dismembered, it would not. Shit, after jury will hear testimony presented before the court deliberated and reached a guilty verdict. But when all 12 jurors were individually surveyed, one of them said he had not reached that decision. This caused the judge to overturn that verdict, as he wanted to. A unanimous verdict. The verdict read by me was his verdict. Woman, no. When the jury reconvened, it had come to a vote. Unanimous finding Salo guilty of all charges that he was charged while the jury's verdict was being read. Health seemed the vivid image of carelessness, premeditation with treachery. Mr. President, is this the jury's verdict? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your sworn verdict? Yes, it is this unanimous jury verdict. Yes, found guilty of 9 counts. David greeted that he seemed unfazed by the jury's verdict. He hoped the judge's sentence. Like his accomplices say hello, he was sentenced to 3 chains, consecutive life sentences, without parole for Glasser murders Chadwell and Frampton. As the judge read his sentence, Shalom showed no emotion, and you didn't know what was going through his mind at that moment, while the judge sealed his fate. Jay Watt, the prosecutor, says that Jay, 48 years old, will turn a mandatory sentence of 22.5 years in prison for killing William Furlong. Jay With, a member of the Hells Angels, had been convicted of charges including manslaughter, use of a deadly weapon, and possession of a deadly weapon by a prohibited weapon. He was to serve a sentence of between 30 and 40 years for kill a Hells Angels prospect named William Furlong at the headquarters of the Hells Angels Club in Omaha in July 2013. Authorities say he was a member of the Hells Angels, and Furlong was a possible member. Both men were seen on video entering the clubhouse of the Hells Angels near 27 YJ in July 2013. Only the condemned came out. According to reports, Furlong, a 48-year-old prospect from the Hells Angels, was found dead in a clubhouse of the Hells Angels of Nebraska on July 14, 2012. Authorities who were at the scene of the crime said he had died of a single gunshot wound. Surveillance video from outside the clubhouse. It showed a man who was believed to be Jay With, 47, at the time at the scene of the crime. Around the time he produced the murder. However, the police could not find him, and a search notice to catch the suspect. We need your help to find a man wanted for murder. Check it out. Jay, 47-year-old Peruvian. He faces a second-degree murder charge in the death of 48-year-old William Furlong. Police found his body at the headquarters of the Hells Angels at 27 YJ last month. Investigators still won't say how Furlong died, only that evidence shows someone killed him, while the search for Witt continued. Surveillance video obtained from the clubhouse turned out to be valuable evidence in the case. The footage had captured a man believed to be entering the club with his girlfriend at around 2:15 a.m. Shortly before 5 a.m., Furlong was seen entering the club. Footage later showed the man believed to be leaving the club with the woman at around 9:30 a.m. with a plastic bag. The man was also seen cleaning the door and pullers with towels before leaving in a Chevy Cruze with Virginia license plates, according to prosecutors. With and Furlong had been arguing before he shot the prospect. They also alleged that With had vandalized the clubhouse to make believe that the murder had been committed by a rival gang after a month of searching. White was eventually captured and arrested by police for more than 1 month. Police could not find him, but today they have found the suspect of murder during a traffic stop with a gun inside the car. He initially pleaded not guilty to the second-rate murder charge. Degree of charge, however, changed his statement. A guilty, and prosecutors dropped the murder charge. Whit was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and this conviction did not, it sat nothing right, in the biker club heels. Angels, whose members had recently been in the news for traffic of drugs, shootings, and gang wars apparently with, was excommunicated of the club after his arrest, so he ceased to be member of the Hells Angels in 2014. Jay Whit was subpoenaed for sentencing in District Court of Douglas County on the day of his sentencing. Whit was seen entering looking impassive and distant, while led to the courtroom by the prison. Although the trial was not recorded, the judge sentenced Whit to 20 years in prison for manslaughter, involuntary, and between 10 and 20 years more for the use of a firearm to commit the crime. In total, between 30 and 40 years in prison. Unfortunately, he would die at the age of 53 in the state penitentiary of Nebraska in September 2019. The Nebraska Department of Correctional Services stated that he had been suffering from a medical condition. Sandy Paula Wallace, a 31-year-old prospect from the Hells Angels, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of non-parole of 15 years and 6 months. The judgment, which was held at the Wanganui High Court, it was to ensure justice for Jasmine's murder Wilson, 30 years old, and mother of 2 children, in 2019. He had reportedly beaten her repeatedly in the previous months. Upon his death, Wallace and Wilson maintained a brief relationship when they were teenagers, but eventually went their separate ways 9 months before his death. The two rekindled their relationship, but Wallace was no longer the one she thought it was Wilson who was seen too often with wounds, and people came to recognize that he had seen him assault her at a Hells Angels club. Wallace was also known to threaten her in the most violent ways, with threats that included and hit his head, cut his throat, kick his head, and even splashing his brains on the pavement. However, this aggression would become deadly on the 31st of July 2019, when Wallace beat him so badly that he broke several ribs, bruised and battered. Wilson was discovered by St. Wallace's father, Stevens Wallace, after receiving a call from your child asking for help. Then he put her in a car and called her ex-woman, Lillian Wallace, mother of Zane herself in turn. He contacted Zane's sister, Steve Lee Wallace, to get in a car and meet with Stephen at the hospital in Wanganui, where they changed cars. Wilson was abandoned in the hospital's emergency department, but he was soon located by the medical team. Her situation was so critical that she had to be transferred to the Wellington Hospital on the 2nd of August 2019, succumbed finally to his wounds. Wallace was arrested, and a trial was scheduled for 2021. Without, however, the trial ended due to problems with the evidence. Medical doctors in May 2021. And another was rescheduled for 2022. Before the rescheduling, Wallace pleaded not guilty to the murder charge against him. He charged on July 25, 2022. Wallace pleaded guilty to the murder charge the day that he was to begin his retrial. He also pleaded guilty to 4 counts of threatening to cause injury. Serious, 3 of assault with intent to cause injury, 2 of threat of death, and 1 of intentional injury of causing injury, battery, male to female assault, and lawsuits with threat. Prosecutors also cited Wallace's long history of violence, especially with their previous partners. He was also violent towards anyone he entered with contact, and had even threatened to kill the children of Wilson and her family. Apart from these, he had also attacked another woman and a man. On August 24, 2019, just 22 days after Wilson's death. At his sentencing, emotions were running high, and the courtroom was loaded as it could feel the animosity between the victim's family and the accused. Security in the room had to be reinforced, and it was necessary to ensure that both families were separated in the gallery from the public. As for Wallace, a loud sob entered the room. It echoed in the room. Things would get denser in the room when the Judge Francis Cook, in charge of the case, sentenced Wallace to life imprisonment with a minimum period of non-parole, 15 years and 6 months, while the judge read Wallace's verdict. These members of the Hells Angels were some of the most notorious, so it is normal for them to receive punishments for the brutal crimes they committed. If you like this 5 video, dangerous Helsa Ingalls reacting to her life sentences. Click on the cards on your screen to watch more exciting videos.